Hey, I'm Steve. Welcome to the Podcast Day Stuff with Steve. I'm getting right to it. I'm sitting here with Jon Green right across from me.
Hey.
And I want to say Lent is heretical. Christians shouldn't do Lent. See, I got him right off the bat. So,
Okay,
so
why?
I'm being a little out there
Yeah.
just for sake of conversation, but I get a little concerned sometimes when people think
You're going for
up,
clickbait.
well,
Yeah.
maybe. Okay, you're assuming I know what that means.
Sorry,
So
I interrupted you. Keep
but
going.
if Lent has to do with maybe the theological concept of penance, and you're trying to earn grace, trying to earn your justification in some way, then I think that's not good. But I'm not sure that's what people mean by Lent. But I think there might be some people out there who have that kind of an idea.
Right.
So let's just talk about, first off, what is Lent? You know more about this than I do. So what is Lent? And give us a little bit of the background.
So Lent is a practice. So like even in the New Testament, we see examples of Christians fasting for spiritual guidance and those sorts of things. And so early on, Christians adopted the practice that came from the Jewish practice of fasting. And and then by about the 4th century or so, through the 11th or 12th century, this whole idea of identifying in the Gospels when Jesus goes out into the desert for 40 days for spiritual guidance from God and to be tested spiritually before he begins his ministry. Christians started practicing that same type of 40-day sort of thing in the 40 days leading up to Easter as a way of identifying with identifying their sin and their need for redemption. Right. In the lead up to Easter, where we celebrate our redemption and all of that sort of stuff. And then, lots of things over the years. But I would say that the main idea for Lent is the Old Testament idea of grieving over sin or grieving over loss. And therefore you fast to identify with that grief, or this idea of spiritual renewal or understanding of my need for God or direction from God in my life. And that's a reason to practice Lent as well.
Okay. And so it seems to be a predominantly maybe Catholic thing as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's mostly a Catholic thing. I think the Orthodox probably practice some form of fasting, but I think my understanding is like the Orthodox, and I might be wrong if you're listening and you're Orthodox, please correct me. But they fast like every week, Friday and Saturday, leading up to going to church on Sunday is the practice of the Orthodox Church. So, but I think in recent history, maybe in the last 50 or 60 years, with the advent of postmodernism and all that sort of stuff, a bunch of Protestants have sort of glommed onto this Catholic practice.
I think you're absolutely right about that. It's morphed, not morphed is the wrong word, but more and more Protestants are participating in Lent.
Right. And I think it's because a lot of people that grow up Protestant, a lot of Protestant denominations don't celebrate the history of Christianity. And so this knowledge of this practice that goes back at least as far as we know, like the 3rd or 4th century, right? But we know that Christians have done this in some way for as long as there have been Christians. And so I think a lot of people that grew up Protestant sort of are looking for ways to do things that connect them with the early church and not just with the Reformation.
So my understanding is when Lent is practiced between Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, or all the way
between Easter Sunday.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's the 40.
I think it works out to actually 46 days. I read.
Yeah, because
but anyway,
because I think the Catholics don't count Sundays,
that's right,
and other feast days for saints. So like St. Patrick's Day doesn't count, and these feast days don't count because you're supposed to celebrate on those days. So we take a break from our mourning and our connection with sin to feast and celebrate the lives of holy people, or the
Can you explain to everybody listening, like, hey, what exactly is Ash Wednesday? Because some people might say, oh, I saw somebody on TV and they had or somebody I know in person has the ashes on the forehead.
Well, I mean, I don't know super well, but it's
you know more than I do about
it's
this.
The idea. So like you read all through the Old Testament about the idea of grief or identification with sin. And there's always like fasting and then sackcloth and ashes, right? And so the idea is like at the beginning of Lent, you cover yourself in ash, right? In the same way as like Old Testament prophets did or King David did, as a way of identifying your sin and starting that sort of grieving or mourning process over your sin. So that would be the Protestant take on a Protestant's take on the practice of Ash Wednesday.
All right, great. So,
or an evangelical Protestant's take on.
Yeah. So when you think about Lent and the value of Lent for us today, what do you think is there something that you say, hey, here are one or two reasons why I think it's good and there's value to practicing Lent?
Well, not just Lent, but fasting in general.
Okay, fasting in general.
Right. So I think like we are like pretty uneducated about the value of fasting. So like, what is it in Matthew at the Transfiguration, and the disciples try to cast out a demon and they can't, right?
Right.
And Jesus tells them that they don't have any faith, and that
this kind can
only
be done
comes
with
prayer and fasting. Right. And then or when in the book of Acts there are several times where the apostles and the church are looking for spiritual guidance, and it says that as they were praying and fasting, right? And so this idea that fasting is a thing that helps us as a spiritual discipline seek spiritual guidance from God or the power of the Holy Spirit in our lives. I think that's highly valuable, but I don't think that's how most people do fasting.
Okay, so sometimes I'm going to come back to this value thing, but it seems like when we're talking about fasting, we're talking about fasting from food.
Fasting from food.
A lot of people during Lent will fast from video games or from, and they'll pick something, I don't want to call it silly. Well, maybe it's silly. I'll fast from lying.
No, that one's silly. You can call that silly.
From speeding.
Yeah, sure.
But
I'll fast from breaking the law. Yeah. I don't think that works.
Or I'll fast from social media.
Yeah. And so I think people do that as a way of making it maybe attainable, or there's this idea that it should be sacrificial, or it should be something that I have to give up. But I don't know. I'm skeptical of that these days. For me,
like giving up like social media,
giving up social media or video games or those kinds of things, because not because it can't be valuable, but I think many people sort of flirt with Jesus's condemnation in Matthew 6 about appearing as though you're fasting, or doing fasting as a matter of convenience or feeling like I'm being spiritual, or those sorts of things, rather than seeking God's guidance or seeking God's power in their lives, which is the purpose of fasting, right? So the quintessential example would be the person who's going to give up social media, and then on Mardi Gras, on Fat Tuesday, the day before Ash Wednesday, they post like, okay, everybody, it's time for my Lent fast from social media. So if you need to reach me for the next 40 days, you can call me on my cell if you know me. And then, but if not, see you after Easter. It's like, that to me borders on the whole like idea of
look at me,
what Jesus is condemning in Matthew 6, where he's like people walking around like with sullen looks on their face, and in his direction is like, don't do that. Wash your face, put on nice clothes, and act like you're not fasting. Right. And so and he says that when you seek attention for a fast, that's your only reward that you get. You don't actually get spiritual power from God or spiritual guidance from God. You're not going to get that reward. The attention that you got was the reward that you get.
So when you've practiced fasting, how does that work for you? Walk us through a little bit about how you do it. And
I don't talk about it anymore.
Okay, well, we're trying to educate people.
Right? We're
not giving attention to yourself.
So in times that I have fasted in my life, that looks like for me, I try to stick to, I've done where I gave up red meat, or whatever. I've done where not eating any food for large periods of time during a day. And
What's large periods of time? I just want to try to help people who are listening think about this a little bit.
like I might go from like lunchtime one day until lunch or dinner the following day.
So 24 hours?
Yeah,
maybe?
24 hours or so. The first time I ever did any sort of fasting, I was a summer missionary in Atlanta, Georgia in 1996. And me and a few of the other guys on our team decided that it was the spiritual thing to do before the Olympics started, to do a 1 week fast.
Yeah.
So we weren't going to eat any food for a week because like we were all dumb 20-year-olds. And
Did you make it?
yeah.
Okay, you made it.
Yeah,
All right.
but our supervisor was like, no, you shouldn't do that. Like that's a week without food and you can't do that. And
So let's just say that you started a fast, just hypothetically today.
Yeah.
And then tomorrow morning you're not eating breakfast. Are
Right.
you using that time to pray or think about things?
right. And yes.
Describe
So
that.
yes, if I'm doing a spiritual fast. So the other thing that in this conversation is that the fad right now for like diet and fitness is intermittent fasting.
Correct.
Right. And so this idea that like going without food for long periods of time is healthy for you, but that and that might be true and that might be good, but that is not the purpose of spiritual fasting. The purpose of spiritual fasting is because I'm seeking God's guidance in my life, or I'm seeking spiritual renewal. So yeah, the idea would be like if you were going to fast, like when you feel hungry, spend time in prayer and dedicate yourself to prayer time during that time of fasting, rather than like fasting is never in scripture is never a thing by itself. It's always accompanied with prayer. It's always prayer and fasting and all those types of things. And so this idea that we would just like fast just to not eat food is not the practice of fasting in spirituality as a spiritual discipline.
Yeah, so I think you said something that I find interesting. You said prayer and fasting.
Right.
And I'm trying to reflect. I don't remember a time where it said fasting and prayer.
I don't know.
Yeah,
it might, but it's
maybe the
but it's
emphasis,
always
there's a connection there,
right.
in
It's
Scripture.
It's a thing to accompany seeking God and to emphasize that in your life. And I think that like I always like what Jesus's response to Satan in the desert, that man doesn't live for bread alone, right? Or that food is created for your body, and his response to about food and the Sabbath is created for man. Like this idea that our bodies are not created for food. Our bodies are not created for sex. They're not created for those things. They're created to glorify God. And this idea of intentionally depriving ourselves of things. Paul even talks about fasting from sex when he's talking about married couples, and it might be healthy for you to not gratify your bodily urges so that you can seek wisdom from God in your life, right? So yeah, I think that prayer aspect is important.
Yeah. So back to the whole Lent thing for a second, because it seems like during Easter season, it becomes somewhat of a popular thing.
Absolutely.
Right now.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where that came from, but it seems like a lot of people don't quite have the, the right perspective on Lent, because I hear people say, well, I'm getting ready to focus more on Easter, and it's helping me to do that. That's what I hear from people.
Right.
So one of my questions is, some people do the whole Lent thing for other reasons.
Right.
Right. And then some people want to focus on Easter. But then I wonder how many people want to, I've done bad things in my life, I need to make up for it. And that's the point that I'm going, I wonder how much of that is out there.
Do you think people think that and then go, okay, I'm going to spend time in prayer and fasting? Or do you think that people, because see, I might think that when people think, I agree, I would agree with that, but maybe people then try to do virtuous things, right? Like I'm going to give to charity or those types of things in response to that urge to make up for
Sure, I was thinking two things.
Right?
One, that you can try to kind of atone for your own stuff.
Right.
Like I'll do charity work, or I just need to beat myself up I need to suffer for what I've done, and I'm going to suffer by
maybe so.
by So that's the little part that I wonder, because I just don't know how many people might have that, but a lot of people just give up stuff because everybody else is doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Or
Yeah. So recently you and I participated in a 36 hour prayer vigil.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you fast during that?
I did not fast during
Me neither.
that.
So, but I did the, I came for a couple hours of the 36 hour prayer vigil, and I think you did even more of that.
Yeah.
But what happens, here's my question, when entire groups of people actually can have a focused time of prayer and fasting? It seems like that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, historically speaking and scripturally speaking, it seems that when entire groups of people do that, then there are things like revival movements and spiritual awakenings and tongues of fire landing on people's heads. Those are the kinds of things that happen when whole groups of people dedicate themselves to prayer and fasting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, what would you say to somebody who's never fasted, to encourage them to say, "Hey, give this a shot"? Yeah, what would you say?
I would say, "Hey, give it a shot."
That's profound.
But not. I would say that some of the spiritual disciplines, like I heard somebody say one time about fitness and about getting in shape, because you and I are both ripped guys.
We are.
We're the peaks of fitness. So,
yeah.
But I heard somebody say one time about fitness that like there's this part of the fitness and health industry that's always trying to sell you things, but everybody knows what the main things are, right? Like move more, eat well, sleep well, and like that's pretty much it, right? And if you do those things consistently, you'll be healthier, right?
Right. Absolutely.
And I would say the same thing is true with the spiritual disciplines. I think people are always looking for like new and interesting ways to freshen it up, right? But when the Bible talks about fasting, it talks about food. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all practice fasting. It's always with food. And so instead of trying to figure out some niche way of making it interesting for yourself or giving yourself a challenge, just give up food for a day. But don't just like tough it out and white knuckle it. Spend that day also in prayer. And then the other thing I would recommend, so there's three things. Give it a shot, give up food for a day, and spend that day in prayer, asking God for wisdom or whatever. And then the third was have one person that in your life that knows about it, and they can ask you how it went.
Yeah. So a couple of months ago, I had a decision to make about something, and I fasted for 2 days. Right.
Yeah.
And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't even tell Mary if she's listening.
Yeah.
She'll find these things out about me. And I tried to use those times, like that 30-minute lunchtime or breakfast time, to pray about the decision I needed to make.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this seems like it was helpful to me. It gave me more focus, set aside time.
Sure.
Yeah. So
that's the other aspect of that. Like you have more time when you're not eating, right? So the time that you take to like drive to a restaurant or prepare food or all of those things, like devoting that time to prayer. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm probably way off calling Lent heretical.
I think maybe the way many people practice Lent might be heretical.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not the concept itself.
Not the concept of, like, should we fast even for long periods of time to seek God and to seek God's power and wisdom and authority in our lives? Yes, we should do that.
Okay. I'm buying it. I agree. All right. Hey, Jon, thanks for talking about Lent and setting me straight on
I don't know about that. But
Ash Wednesday all the way to Easter. You know more about that stuff than I do, so it's great. Hey, I'm Steve. Glad you listened to the podcast today as Jon and I talked about Lent and fasting and some spiritual benefits to this spiritual practice. Hey, grace and peace be with you, and we'll catch you next time.
Awesome.